In the winter of 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry sailed 4 American warships into Edo Bay and forced the most isolated empire on Earth to open its ports to foreign trade. Historians point to gunboat diplomacy, Western expansionism, and Japan's strategic weakness. But there is one force that rarely makes the textbook: soy sauce. Specifically, a centuries-old monopoly on fermented soy that had concentrated power, wealth, and political control into the hands of a tiny merchant class, a class whose influence Perry's arrival would permanently shatter. Today, you can buy a bottle of Kikkoman at any supermarket for about $3. Music. So, how did this dark, unremarkable liquid go from being one of the most carefully guarded culinary secrets in human history to something we pump onto our fried rice without a second thought? To understand soy sauce, you have to start with chemistry. The human body cannot build proteins from scratch. It has to break them down from outside sources, and the most efficient way to do that is through amino acids, the molecular building blocks that make muscle, regulate hormones, and keep the brain firing correctly. Soy sauce is one of the most concentrated natural sources of free glutamates on the planet. A single tablespoon contains compounds that trigger the 5th taste receptor on your tongue, the one scientists now call umami, the taste of protein itself. Your tongue evolved to seek it out the same way your eyes evolved to track movement. Your gut needs it to absorb nitrogen. Your brain interprets its presence as a signal. This food is nutritionally dense. This food will keep you alive. Without adequate protein intake, the human body begins consuming itself. Muscles atrophy, the immune system fails, and cognitive function deteriorates in ways that happen faster than most people expect. Severe protein deficiency can kill a child within weeks. That is not a slow process. Fermentation amplifies this effect. The microbes that turn soybeans into sauce, the Aspergillus molds, the lactic acid bacteria, the yeasts are essentially pre-digesting protein, breaking long molecular chains into fragments your body can absorb almost immediately. Long before anyone understood microbiology, humans in East Asia had figured out that fermented soy made food taste better, kept longer, and kept people stronger. Deer in Sichuan province have been observed licking the bark of trees that have been exposed to natural soy fermentation runoff. They return to the same sites year after year, drawn by something they cannot name. Humans watched this and followed the smell. Music. Some of the earliest evidence of deliberate soy fermentation comes from burial sites in the Jiangsu province of China, where ceramic vessels containing the residue of fermented soybean paste have been dated to approximately 500 BCE. That makes organized soy sauce production older than the Roman Republic by a wide margin. But the practice was not confined to one region. Korean archaeologists have found fermentation crocks in sites near the ancient capital of Gyeongju, dating to roughly the same period, suggesting that 2 separate civilizations independently discovered that soybeans, salt, and thyme produce something extraordinary. These were not casual kitchen experiments. Communities structured their agricultural calendars around the soybean harvest, and some of the earliest trade documents from the Han Dynasty make repeated reference to fermented sauces as currency equivalents. Items traded not because they were exotic, but because they were essential. But fermenting soy paste in a clay pot is one thing. Turning liquid soy into a commodity that could be standardized, stored, transported across hundreds of miles, and taxed that required something else entirely. It required technology, organization, and eventually, government control. The technology arrived in the form of cedarwood barrels, massive cedar vats, some holding over 5,000 liters, that allowed brewers to age sauce for up to 3 years without spoilage. The longer the aging, the more complex the flavor, and the higher the price. Chinese brewers experimenting with different fermentation temperatures in the 2nd century CE accidentally discovered that soy mash exposed to cold slows microbial activity in ways that produce dramatically different flavor profiles, a discovery that laid the groundwork for temperature-controlled fermentation centuries before any European scientist thought to formalize the concept. The government noticed. By the time of the Tang dynasty, around 618 CE, the imperial court had established formal regulations governing the production and taxation of fermented sauces. Private brewers existed, but they operated under license. The largest production facilities were imperial ventures, staffed by specialists whose recipes were considered state secrets. This was not about flavoring food. Soy sauce revenue funded military campaigns into Central Asia, financed the construction of the Grand Canal, and subsidized the Tang court's famously lavish culture. A government minister of the 8th century argued in a surviving court document that fermented condiment taxes were preferable to land taxes because they could be collected without displacing farmers. The political logic of extraction without visible suffering. For the next 1,000 years, soy sauce monopolies remained among the most reliable sources of government revenue across East Asia. The Japanese took this logic and sharpened it. By the Edo period, roughly 1600 to 1868, the shogunate had built an entire regulatory architecture around soy sauce production in the Noda and Choshi regions northeast of Edo. The largest brewing families, most famously the Mogi clan, held hereditary production licenses that could not be bought or transferred. Unauthorized brewing was not merely illegal, it was treated as economic sabotage, punishable by destruction of the offending operation, and in extreme cases exile. And here is the word that the Mogi clan gave to their most prized sauce. They called it tamari, the liquid that pools. That word, and the family name Mogi, eventually became the founding seed of a company you know today. Every bottle of Kikkoman, in every restaurant in 60 countries, traces its lineage to a brewing license issued by the Tokugawa shogunate. Every time a chef reaches for that bottle, they are participating in a commercial tradition nearly 400 years old. The Japanese also weaponized it. There is documented evidence, not legend but actual logistical records, that during the Sengoku period, the era of warring states in the 16th century, rival warlords deliberately targeted enemy soy sauce supplies. A domain without sauce had soldiers with poor nutrition, food that spoiled faster in the field, and a civilian population whose morale collapsed in ways that were faster and harder to reverse than the loss of a castle. Oda Nobunaga, the most ruthless of the unifiers, reportedly requisitioned soy sauce production rights in every territory he conquered before he requisitioned the rice harvest. He understood the hierarchy of necessity, music. And this is where soy sauce stops being a condiment and starts reshaping the world. While the shoguns were building their production monopolies in Japan, another trade network was forming across one of the most treacherous maritime corridors on Earth, the South China Sea. Starting in the 14th century, Chinese merchant fleets began carrying barrels of fermented soy southward into the ports of Southeast Asia, where no local equivalent existed and demand was immediate and total. A single junk could carry hundreds of barrels, each sealed with pine resin, each barrel representing 6 months of fermentation time and a specific proprietary recipe that the captain's family guarded with the same secrecy as a navigational chart. The conditions were brutal. Monsoons regularly swamped the cargo decks, and barrels lost to seawater were a financial catastrophe that could ruin a family for a generation. Ibn Battuta, the Moroccan scholar who traveled through southern China in 1345 CE, described in his Rihla the remarkable sight of Chinese merchants in the port of Quanzhou loading what he called black water in sealed vessels alongside silk and porcelain, treating it with the same commercial reverence as the other luxury goods. He noted that local rulers in the ports the merchants visited would provide armed escorts for shipments of this substance, the way a European king might escort a shipment of spices. Soy sauce was exchanged for tropical hardwoods, spices, and tin. Not metaphorically, literally. In parts of the Malay Peninsula, where fermented condiments were unknown and the cooking culture depended entirely on fresh herbs and coconut, a barrel of aged Chinese soy sauce could command prices equivalent to a month's wages for a skilled craftsman. The Fujian merchants who controlled this trade became some of the wealthiest individuals in the pre-modern world. Their descendants still dominate the food industry across Southeast Asia today. The Dutch East India Company first encountered soy sauce in the late 17th century in the ports of Nagasaki. Looking at? The VOC began shipping barrels of Japanese soy sauce to Europe under the name soy, the first time the word appeared in a European language. It became a luxury item at the courts of Louis XIV and George I, served alongside roasted meats as a finishing condiment for the aristocracy. The French called it soya, misunderstanding it as a spice rather than a sauce. They paid spice prices for it. And then the supply lines disrupted, and European courts went without, and they had to find substitutes, which is precisely how Worcestershire sauce was invented. A British colonel in colonial India trying to recreate a fermented Asian condiment and producing something entirely different by accident. Power over a condiment shaped European flavor culture in ways that lasted centuries. But no moment crystallized the political weight of soy sauce more sharply than the years surrounding the First Sino-Japanese War of 1894. China had controlled the major soy sauce export routes into Korea and Southeast Asia for centuries. Japan, rapidly industrializing after the Meiji Restoration, began aggressively targeting those markets. The war was ostensibly about Korea, but embedded in the conflict was a commercial war over fermented condiment markets that had been building for decades. Before the war, a barrel of premium Japanese soy sauce sold in Korean ports for roughly twice the price of Chinese equivalent. By 1895, after Japan's decisive victory, Chinese producers were effectively locked out of the Korean market by punitive tariffs. A barrel of Chinese soy sauce that had sold for 800 copper coins in Seoul in 1893 found no buyers at any price by 1896. The human cost was not soldiers on a battlefield, it was tens of thousands of Chinese fermentation workers in Guangdong and Fujian whose livelihoods collapsed within a single harvest season. Their families gathered what they could, tore apart the brining vessels, and tried to reclaim the salt-saturated wood for resale. It was never enough. Some historians argue that the restructuring of East Asian soy sauce trade routes contributed as much to the collapse of Qing commercial authority as any territorial concession. Control of the condiment was control of the kitchen, and control of the kitchen was control of the culture. Music. There was one person who understood this more precisely than almost anyone alive in the late 19th century. His name was Shiba Saburo Tanaka, a small-scale brewer in the Noda region, and on a morning in 1887, he did something that the Mogi clan's licensing system had made structurally impossible for 2 centuries. He walked to the prefectural office in Chiba and registered his fermentation recipe under his own name, not under a hereditary brewing license, not under the authority of a regional monopoly, but as an individual intellectual property claim under Japan's newly adopted Meiji Commercial Code. Music, pause. It was an almost absurdly small act. One man, one piece of paper, one signature. But it was also a direct assault on the legal architecture of feudal condiment control that the shogunate had spent 200 years constructing. Within 5 years, 47 independent brewers in the Noda region had followed Tanaka's example. The Mogi family, facing competition for the first time in living memory, did something remarkable. Rather than using their political connections to suppress the independents, they absorbed them. In 1917, the major Noda brewing families merged into a single cooperative that would eventually become Kikkoman. The monopoly did not end overnight. But Tanaka's act of paperwork shattered the moral authority of hereditary licensing in a way that could never be repaired, all because of soy sauce. And then, almost anticlimactically, soy sauce stopped being scarce. Industrial fermentation technology arrived in the early 20th century in the form of hydrolysis, a chemical process that could break down soy protein into amino acids in a matter of hours rather than months. Hydrolyzed vegetable protein could produce something that resembled the flavor profile of traditional soy sauce at a fraction of the cost and in a fraction of the time. A single hydrolysis facility built in Osaka in 1924 could produce more liquid condiment in a week than the entire traditional Noda brewing region produced in a year. the geographic monopoly dissolved. New soy sauce factories appeared in Sao Paulo, in Chicago, in Rotterdam. The specific deposits of the Kanto Plain, the particular cedar vats, the 3-year aging process, none of it was commercially necessary anymore. Today, the world produces roughly 14 billion liters of soy sauce annually. The majority is manufactured through accelerated hydrolysis rather than traditional fermentation, aged for days rather than years, in stainless steel tanks rather than cedarwood vats. The same liquid that funded the Tang military, controlled the shipping lanes of the South China Sea, and got served at the court of Louis XIV now arrives in a plastic sachet with your takeout order. And there is something both wonderful and strange about that. For thousands of years, soy sauce shaped the fate of nations. It determined which ports prospered and which ones starved. It decided which armies could campaign across hostile terrain and which ones deteriorated in the field. It decided which merchant families accumulated dynastic wealth and which ones stayed laborers. People were taxed for it, imprisoned for making it without permission, and risked monsoons and pirates to move it. Emperors built entire bureaucracies just to regulate it. And now, you can find it in a packet at the bottom of a delivery bag, and nobody thinks it is remarkable at all. That gap between what soy sauce once was and what it is now tells you something important about how power works. The things that feel permanent and inevitable, the monopolies, the hereditary licenses, the trade networks, the political authority built on control of a single fermented liquid, they are often built on foundations that can shift overnight. The Tokugawa shogunate felt permanent. The VOC's trade monopoly felt permanent. The idea that soy sauce would always require centuries of specialized knowledge to produce felt permanent. None of it was. You can see this pattern repeating with other resources right now. Rare earth minerals, lithium, cobalt, neodymium, are today what soy sauce was in the 14th century. Essential, geographically concentrated, and controlled by a small number of actors who understand that their leverage depends on keeping the technology scarce. Countries are building military strategies around them. Companies are signing extraction contracts that resemble the Mogi brewing licenses more closely than most economists would like to admit. But battery technology is already changing the equation, just like hydrolysis changed it for soy sauce. One day, probably sooner than most people expect, rare earth dependency might follow the same path from strategic resource to bulk commodity. Soy sauce did not stop mattering because it became less useful. Your body needs those amino acids just as urgently as a Tang dynasty soldier's body did 1200 years ago. What changed was access. So the next time you reach for that bottle, the dark glass one, the one with the red cap, the one you tip without measuring because you know roughly how much you want, take a second to think about what you are actually holding. You are holding the product of 6,000 years of agricultural knowledge. You are holding the output of a fermentation tradition that survived the collapse of dynasties, the arrival of gunboats, and the industrialization of everything. You are holding the reason a Dutch merchant risked a 3-month sea voyage in the 17th century, and the reason a Japanese brewer defied a 200-year monopoly with a single piece of paper. It is a dark, quiet, unremarkable liquid. It makes everything taste like itself. Music. If you found this surprising, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment telling us which part of soy sauce's history surprised you the most. We have plenty more stories like this one coming, so make sure you do not miss them.